Welcome to the Hoof and Fang podcast. I'm Kurt Graves.
And I'm JP Rindfleisch IX.
And here we are again. Thank you for coming back. Thanks for showing up after week one.
Yeah, you didn't scare me away. There were no guarantees. It was a mystery.
Yeah. How's life? How are things?
They're good. I decided I wanted to open up a TikTok shop like 2 weeks ago. Okay. It's wild. It's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was packing, and then as I was done, I was like, oh, I'm all done. And then I looked and I'm like, no, I have another order. And I was like, oh, okay, this is fun. I love this.
Right.
Absolutely love it. Also, oh no.
Yeah. Is it to sell all those amazing books stacked up behind you?
Yes. Well,
yes.
Yeah, all of those. So
nice.
Yeah. How about you? What are you up to?
Good. As we were talking about before we hit record, it is election day in Wisconsin. It has been it's always a wild election cycle in Wisconsin now. We are subjected to so many ads and so many flyers and internet content. Like, it is constantly assaulting us at every turn.
Madness.
It is beginning to be something I truly despise. So many text messages every single fucking day from very well-meaning friends who want to make sure I know to vote. I know to vote. I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
And then of so many fundraising emails, I don't know when the reprieve comes, because in November was like, oh, good, we're done with this for a little while. And it just immediately started back up.
Yep.
Immediately. So, yeah. So that's where I'm at. It's been a day. I'm looking forward to it being over. I'm nervous about the results. I hope it goes the way I want it to, but
fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I have good news for you.
Oh, good.
I listened to Bossy Pants.
You did?
I loved it so much.
You're such a good person. Like, you did your homework immediately.
I did. I wrote it down. I was like, I gotta write it down. And then I started listening to it. I was like, oh, I'm gonna have a good time listening to this. It was great. Yeah, It was super fun.
It is. Isn't it fun? And she's such a good storyteller, and in both writing, and then like, who can deliver it better than her with her wry charm and wit?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. I'm actually listening right now to a new memoir. It's by Jeffrey Self. Do you know him? He's a comedian. He's a queer comedian. He's sort of like one part of a comedy duo with Cole Escola, who is also a very popular queer comedian, which is to say, still under the radar. But he wrote the Broadway show Oh Mary that came out last year off Broadway and is on Broadway this season. And so Jeffrey Self wrote his memoir, or his collection of essays, and it's quite good and quite fun. Yeah, I would say it's not. What's it called? It's not a laugh riot like some parts of Bossy Pants are, at least not yet, because he definitely is not shying away from like the darker parts of being a queer person, even at the turn of the century. It's called Self-Sabotage. So, but I just started it the other day, and I've been enjoying it. But it has a different vibe, but it's still very smart and funny. And I've laughed out loud several times, which is good.
Yeah.
So
I'll check that out next.
Yeah. Hey, celebrity memoirs there. Although the problem with Tina Fey's Bossy Pants being so great was that a lot of people tried to follow her formula.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of good but not great celebrity memoirs that followed. Like I Love Her, but Amy Poehler's book, not the same. No. I Love Her, but Mindy Kaling's books, not the same.
Yeah.
They just don't quite reach the same level. So
yeah. But good to know.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean there aren't amazing celebrity memoirs out there that aren't trying to be funny. Like I also like I loved Sally Field's memoir. I love Harvey Firestein's memoir. I love Patti LuPone's memoir almost purely because you must be able to hear, like you can hear in the audio that there must have been some poor schmuck who had to be like, actually, Patty, could you say that again? But we need a little more diction.
Oh,
we need a little more. And then she's over enunciating the sentence just to get back at that schmuck. And it's like, oh my God, that poor person. And I work in audiobooks, so like there's a good chance that someday I'm going to meet that person and I get to ask them about how it was.
Oh, I love that. That sounds terrifying, but I love it.
Right. So yeah, celebrity memoirs for the win.
Yeah.
So yeah. Are you working on anything interesting?
I just put out a free queer short story. It was my favorite short story that I wrote last year. It's queer sci-fi. Yeah. So I just put that
out. Where is it out?
Basically, if you go to my website, on my list of books, I have on the bottom other short stories, and it's just one of those. You can download it for free. So,
wow, yeah. He's just giving it away over here.
Yeah, well, ideally you'd sign up for like my newsletter or something, but yeah, this is for free.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, so right now on Patreon, we still have the Animorphs Nickelodeon show reaction videos going strong. So you can check that out as we're going through at least the first season. No promises on season 2. We'll see how it goes.
Why do you say that?
One, just logistics. Like, with Maz
that's true.
in a different state now. How are we going to watch a TV show together? And also I'm lazy, and like I had that whole thing set up so that like I was recording the show and I was recording the both of us at certain angles.
Yep.
And it was all a template in Premiere Pro that I would just like punch everything in and then we're done. And I was like, do I have to redo a template just to watch season 2? I don't know.
Guess we'll find out.
We'll find out. So that's still going on. Early Shift, as we have said before, is on hiatus. And we'll just kind of see what else happens. Yeah. So we think Maz is coming back next week, although I did give her the option to extend her time off if she needed it. But last report I got, like, they were unpacking. Things were going well. They really liked their place. So
good.
Fingers crossed. That thing
not trying to kill the boys and as a cumulative.
No, I don't think so. At least I believe they all made it. And
good.
Things are going. I probably should send a message this week and be like, hey,
just make sure. Just me alone in the house now.
What with doing a new job and going into the office every day now, but like, how's it going? So yeah, we'll find out. We'll get an update from Maz and see what's going down. But again, like I said last week, if you do have a hankering for more Maz and Kirt, her episode of the Queers and Quills podcast came out last week, so you can go listen to that right now. And there's so much more of me, which I know people are always wanting. So that's on YouTube and wherever podcasts are available. So, in fact, there's too much of me right now, if I'm being honest.
No, false.
I'm sick of me. I'm sick of podcasts that feature me. There's too many going on, but maybe so space them out, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Fine. Just listen to a couple a week. Don't overdo it. I don't want people to get sick of me. Like, you could be listening to an audiobook I narrate and listening to all 3 podcasts with like 4 or 5 episodes coming out every week right now between all 3 of those. And like, I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that for anybody.
Well, maybe someone does. You never know. And they have the opportunity now.
Yeah, I suppose. But then inevitably, they will get sick of me. And that's not great.
I don't know about that.
It's okay to get sick of me? Is that what you're saying?
No, I said I don't know about that. I don't think that's possible. But we'll see.
I don't know. I guess if someone was obsessed with me, it would be okay. Speaking of being obsessed with things,
Ooh, perfect segue.
Right into this week's topic. Sometimes Maz and I have a chance to do this. We just talk about things that like we're currently obsessed with. And so since I have a new person to talk to about it, I was like, let's talk about things we're obsessed with. So take it away, JP. What are you currently obsessed with? Item number 1.
Okay, so I love The Wheel of Time. It is my absolute favorite. I ended up finding The Wheel of Time just out of college. It was my first job, and I was working 12-hour shifts for 7 days in a row, and then I would take 7 days off. But we would do the night shift, and if you did things right, you would have 3 hours where you had nothing to do. Okay. And so I would just read. And so I found The Wheel of Time. I read it. Then I found the audiobooks. And I listened through all of the audiobooks at least 3 times, which is the equivalent of like more than 3 months of listening every day.
Wow.
Yeah. So I loved the series. When it switched over to the TV show, which is on its 3rd season now, amazing. Like I said last time, I really love seeing adaptations from books to shows and seeing what decisions they make. And the fact that Rafe Jenkins, I think that's his last name. I've screwed that up. Who cares? Sorry. I'm sorry.
Whoever that person is, they're not listening to this podcast.
You never know. But he's a queer writer, and he took over the showrunner for Wheel of Time, and he really there are bits in the story that hint at queer relationships, but they don't expressly state them. Now, the books were written in the 90s, but like as someone reading it and you see things like the 2 women of the tower or whatever were pillow friends, like what do you think that meant? You know? So they really lean into it in a positive way, I think, for the Wheel of Time, which is really nice to see like queer representation in a fantasy show, right? So yeah. I love it. I'm obsessed.
I too am a big fan of the television show, but I never read the books.
Oh.
So I'm just experiencing the story for the first time through the TV show, but I'm really enjoying it. And I think especially this 3rd season has been really wonderful. So this is one that they better continue until it's done.
Yeah, I'm hoping so.
And they better nail the landing, because I will not have another fantasy series go off the rails after like 6 seasons. So
yeah, agreed. Yeah, my partner is liking the show but hasn't read the books, so then I'll every once in a while I'll pause and I'll have to say all these like fun things and be like, oh yeah, Teleron Riyadh, that's the dream world. And he's just like, come on, what are you talking about?
Well, I suppose you listened to the audiobooks. I was like,
yeah.
I wondered if like watching the TV show, you're like, oh, that's how that's said. Because I watch it with the captions on, because the name, like anytime I'm watching a fantasy show, I'm usually watching with the captions on, because the made up names are just like hard to wrap your mind around. And I like to know how things are spelled. And so I've been watching and I was like, I wonder how many people are for the first time learning how to say these names and places.
Yeah. No, I listen to the audiobook, so they sound the exact same. So that's perfect for me.
It would be bad if they were inconsistent.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So, have you listened to the new versions of the audiobooks?
No, I am kind of interested in it because Rosamund Pike read them. So
yeah, and won an Audie, like female narrator of the year a few years ago for them.
All right. So, I really did like the originals though, with Michael Kramer and Kat Redding. Those were really good.
Did you know they're married? Their husband and wife duo.
Yeah.
That's adorable. It's almost too adorable.
Agreed. It's too much.
It's too much.
But I do want to know, what's your first one? What are you obsessed with?
I have been obsessed with the television program School Spirits, which I am watching on Paramount Plus, but I think it's also like a Showtime show. I think it's also probably based on a book, because what isn't these days? It'd make a great book if it wasn't. Somebody dropped the ball on that. It is the story of a girl who dies in her high school and finds out that there are a bunch of ghosts living in her high school that she can now see and interact with. And most of them are teenagers, because it's a high school. And so anybody who died on the grounds is stuck there. And it's the story of unfolding, but like she doesn't remember her own death and everybody else does. So it's like this mystery of like, well, what happened to her? And they can't find her body. So like her family and the school at first is like she's just missing, but she's obviously a ghost, so we know more, and it's like so much fun. And I like there must be a queer man in charge of this show or a really horny woman, because the male nudity is prevalent. And it's like, thank you. Thank you. Barely, like, there isn't one glimpse of titty, but we have so many boy butts. And it's like,
Perfect.
Snaps.
Yeah.
Snaps for that. We really, like, that's the way it should be. So, and compelling storytelling and, like, good acting and, like...
Yeah. Yeah, we watched the first couple of episodes, but the problem was it was just on Paramount Plus, which we weren't using enough, so we kind of forget about it. But how many seasons is that?
So they just wrapped up season 2, and we just found out there's a 3rd season coming. Which, like, if there wasn't, I'd have been like, because they did not complete the story, and we need to know more. So,
yeah, very nice.
So that I highly recommend School Spirits on Paramount Plus. I'm sure you can also like buy it on Amazon, anywhere.
Yeah.
It's probably on other streaming services as well. So, all right, what's your number 2?
So this just finished, but I love Severance. The season 2 just finished, and it's one of those shows where I just love mind-bendy shows. And with this one, we have characters who are basically experiencing like what happens if you just were a totally different person when you went to work and you just got to forget those hours. Would people do that? And then what about the lives of the people in the office who never get to leave that office? How do they exist and sort of function? It becomes really weird and like pseudo mystical because there's some extra bits to it. But, I love it. I love, especially with both Severance and like Wheel of Time, the behind the scenes, like listening to the directors talk about like why they chose certain things or like how they did certain things. If I really am obsessed with something, I'll watch all of them. So yeah, I've been loving it. It's super weird. The first episode I was okay with. I liked it, but a lot of people didn't get past it. For some reason, it just
the first season.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
First episode of the first season. It was like a little too slow for some people. Honestly, if that was your experience, I would just go on to like maybe the next 2 more episodes, because it's totally worth it. It is wild.
Yeah, I will say I'm one of those people who didn't immediately jump in to after the first episode. But once it started getting critical acclaim, and I have great faith in especially Adam Scott as an actor, but Patricia Arquette as well, I was like, there's gotta be something there. Patricia. So I went back. I enjoyed season 1. I will say that final episode of season 1 where people were losing their shit, I was like, maybe I read too many books, but I was like, this is beat for beat how I would have expected this finale to go.
Yeah.
And people were acting like they were surprised. And I was like, what? This is exactly what I thought was going to happen.
I agree. I think I was in the same boat where I was like, this is exactly what's going to happen. But it's the fact that it got to happen.
I agree. It's well done. And like, but like, it was the surprise and like the shocking twist. I was like, what?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I wasn't like shocked.
This is what needed to happen to drive the narrative forward. Otherwise, I was like, what do you mean shocking twist? So that's a little vague talk for those who haven't watched season 1. I haven't started season 2. So I need to, now that it's done,
it's even weirder.
I think it's probably going to be one of those like sick day binges. So, because there are some shows like that are just like, they're kind of weird and mind-bendy and out there that like, I don't feel like sitting down and watching that on a Tuesday night.
Oh yeah.
I don't feel like, and especially a show like that, like I appreciate being able to just watch the whole thing.
One thing I will say, and it's odd, it's both these 2 shows I'm obsessed with have weekly releases, and I'm watching them as they weekly release. And there is something about having multiple people that are interested in it and sort of talking about it that I love. And I'm glad that we're sort of coming back to weekly releases, because binges are great. But when I get time to like hear other people's takes on an episode and like what will happen next, I get more excited about the show.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I have been enjoying Like TikTok is now feeding me all of the Wheel of Time, like people who know a lot more about it from the books and talking about what's different and explaining some things that might not be as clear if you haven't read the books.
I love those.
And it's like I'm fully in the algorithm of that now. So every week, like I have to watch the episodes before I can go on TikTok because it's like I don't want anything spoiled. So
yeah. What's your second?
I am currently obsessed. There's an author. His name is Bjorn Wild. I found him first on Instagram, maybe, but then quickly followed him to TikTok, or maybe it was the other way around. Just this like charming, cute man who is writing spicy novellas with like illustrated covers, and I was like, that's adorable. And I didn't pick one up for the longest time because I was like, oh, I don't know that that's for me. Like I already read so much romance. But then his latest one was called Taking the Step, and it's like a stepdad thing. And the White Lotus thing was happening. And I was like, all right, I'm going to see how he handled this. And like I just like started consuming all of them, and they are so, like they are novellas, and but they're also novellas that are like split up into parts. So like they're not long. Like I read like 4 or 5 parts a night for a little while, and I was just like eating them like chocolate chip cookies. So they are just fun, which is how he markets them. I'm not being disparaging by being like, they're just fun. They're like, he's like, this is what I'm making. I'm making just fun, spicy, ridiculous in some cases stories, and I'm putting them out there on Kindle. They're on Kindle Unlimited for those who have that. Go support this guy. He's just fun, and he's a Midwestern. He's a Midwestern gay. So we love to see it. We want to see them thrive.
Yeah, I haven't picked up his stuff, but I love his TikToks. I follow him, and I find them very, very charming and endearing. So I definitely, I'll need to check it out.
Yeah. All right, what's last on your list?
So I watch a lot of Twitch because I stream on Twitch, so I tend to support a lot of followers. And there's this one person I follow, and they've been obsessed with MAFS, which is Married at First Sight, specifically Australia. And the entire Twitch channel has become obsessed with it. And so we will watch episodes and we will talk about the episodes, and we are just cannot stop talking about this show. They had their final vows this week, but it's basically the premise that these couples are married at first sight. They're put together by experts, quote unquote. And then they have to live together for 3 months, and then they make their decision. And in the Married at First Sight, like, are you going to stay together? Like, you know, basically, I don't think they can legally make them marry, but they have their like final vows and whatnot. But specifically this season of MAFS Australia, because I can't speak to any others because I haven't seen them, the sound crew, or like the music crew, is nuts. And they will like, on the turn of a dime, they will pick up the violins, and they will like, at the very subtle things, they will like do specific, very orchestrated music. And it is top notch quality. And like, I've watched like The Bachelor and things like that with my mom growing up. They were okay. This I am like addicted to, and I think part of it is just because of the editing and like the quality of like the music in the background that really drives the narrative. It's nuts.
I love that. I too,
and there's so much drama.
Was one of those like kids watching The Bachelor and The Bachelorette with my mom. In fact, we would have parties where my friends would come over, and we would we made a wedding cake, I think, for the finale of the first Bachelorette.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I never did that, but that sounds lovely.
We made it a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember one time we went to my friend Michael's house, and we were supposed to watch it there, but he got in a fight with his mom. And he said something, I don't know, one of them said something like, well, maybe then people should leave. And like, it was obviously one of those empty threats. Like, like we should just calm down because otherwise like this is going to end. And I remember like pulling the bag of popcorn out of the microwave and being like, fine, we'll go. And I marched out, and all my friends followed me, and they're like, I can't believe you did that. And I was like, The Bachelor starts at 10 minutes. We need to get to TV.
That's amazing. I love that
such
drama.
A bossy little homo.
Well,
I was a bossy homo. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll let that be where
it's in
it
the
is.
past tense. It's in the past tense. Yeah.
What's your last one?
Well, honestly, it's not even my last one, but it's like the third one I'll talk about. The one, because like I actually have a lot that I'm obsessed with lately, but one show that I am so obsessed with is The Pit on Max. It's a new medical drama that came out this year, starring Noah Wyle of ER fame, obviously playing a different character. It is a emergency room in Pittsburgh, so it's like the Pit, which is slang for the emergency room, but also it's in the Pit, Pitt. And I started watching because my friend Deep D, who is a narrator, is on the show.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, it'll be so much fun to see Deep D on a television show. And I started watching, and I was like so hooked. So the premise of the show is that instead of taking place over like several months, or like every episode is a new case of the week or whatever, or like a special surgery like it is in a lot of other things, and there's like all sorts of interpersonal like romances and fights and stuff breaking out. The premise of the show is that every hour of the show equates to an hour of time in the ER. So the whole show takes place over one shift.
Yeah.
And it just follows them, not quite real time, but like pretty close. And like you're just getting a chance to see all of these dramas, these micro dramas that happen in an emergency room every day. And like it has been hailed by many in the medical community as like remarkably accurate for a television show. Now, is it probably more cases per hour than an emergency room might see, or like more TV worthy dramatic cases? Certainly. Probably, it's probably a lot more mundane stuff minute to minute in a real emergency room. But the medicine is really cool. The things they show, because it's HBO Max, is really interesting. If you have a weak stomach, I'm not sure it's for you, but like if you're into medical dramas and you can handle like the real nitty gritty shit, it's fascinating. And I love shows about competent people doing their work.
Yeah. I might try to convince my partner, because my partner's mom was director of nursing in a small town, but dealt with sort of the hospital and emergency room. And then my dad was a fire chief, so he did a lot of the ambulance stuff. So this sounds right up my alley.
Yeah. It's I think you'll like it. Like, it's so well done. It's hard for me to imagine someone not liking it.
Yeah.
So yeah, highly, highly, highly recommend. So that's what we're obsessed with. We'd love to hear what you're obsessed with. If you want to sound off in the comments or send us a message at hoofandfangpodcast@gmail.com, or in Patreon, or any of the other ways you can get a hold of us. We are always interested in what you guys think as well. So let us know. And we also had a chance to speak to another author. So we have another author interview. Maz and I chatted with Gwen Tolios, who is a queer author who, after traveling and time abroad, has settled in Chicago. So another Midwest girly. She lives with a cat who refuses to cuddle and spends the weekends chugging coffee and typing words. So here is our conversation with Gwen. Gwen, welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to be able to chat with you.
Thanks for having me here.
We're excited. So the first question we ask everybody, what is your author origin story? How did you get started?
I think it was my second grade teacher. We had to write stories in English. And so I remember writing a story that was so long, I was allowed to skip other assignments. Because she gave me the extra time to write it. And I was like, oh, great. Okay. So I can produce something long, and I can get out of other work, which was great. So I liked that, but I probably, and then also in 5th and 6th grade is when I started doing world building. I remember reading Bruce Coville's Into the Land of the Unicorns and got so inspired to develop my own unicorn world. But then got serious about publishing when I was in college. So a huge trip between fifth grade and college, but and in that middle ground, it was just a lot of fan fiction.
Not just.
Yeah,
you're right.
Training ground for so many great authors.
That's true, and I tend to write a lot of it on archive of my own. I think my word count at this point is like 1.3 million. So I have written a lot of fan fiction.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What are the fandoms that dominate?
That is a good question. I tend to float in and out, but I think last time I checked, the one that I have the most fics written for is actually BBC Merlin.
Oh wow!
I love that
awesome.
series.
So
although of course it never got gay enough.
Well,
they strung us along.
Yeah. I mean, but it's also an older show, so there's a lot of queer coding in there, which I think a lot of people clung to.
I think they did it on purpose. I think they were spoon feeding that to us.
A lot of the staff commentary is the same thing. They're like, we knew this was a gay show, we just couldn't actually make it gay.
Yeah.
And the fans
was the style at the time, I think.
Yes, it was. So
yeah,
and I jumped on that bandwagon after it was already finished and complete. So I found it via Netflix. Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's the best way to find shows is when it's all like you can just binge it and just like absorb all of it.
It is so nice. There've definitely been a few shows where I'm still waiting for like season 2 even, and I'm just like, it's been 3 years, it's probably not coming, but I can dream.
Yeah. So when you did turn the corner to publishing, where did you start? Did you start with like full-length novels, or where did you get your publishing feet wet?
So I actually got my feet wet with short stories. So the first thing I had ever sold was actually to a podcast called The Overcast, which really isn't done anymore. But it was science fiction and fantasy stories around the Pacific Northwest. So I had a Selkie story that I ended up selling to Net, and that was my first sale. And I have primarily done a lot of short stories. I do have a few novels like hidden in the drawer. One novel that has been published, but the short stories tend to be where my heart kind of lies and where I just naturally tend to write. So most of my publications are that.
Why do you think that is? What appeals to you about the short story?
To me, they're easier. I feel like for every time I've tried to write a novel, I run into pacing issues because I have a hard time stretching out a plot for 60,000 words. I really like to focus in on one issue, one character, one aspect of the world. And when you're that narrow, it's really hard to expand a story and make it go novel length, especially without making it feel weird and awkward pacing, and things tend to feel flat. But when I really can narrow in, my sweet spot then ends up being between about 1,000 and 5,000 words for a story. Yeah.
Wow.
I think that's so cool because I struggle so much with writing short stories. Like I can't be that concise. You know what I mean? Like keeping a plot and those themes and everything sharpened is really tough. And I think people don't realize that when they're writing.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about like epic fantasies. Like I would love to be able to write those, but I can't hold that many plot elements in my head together, and I can't hold that many characters in my head together. I've noticed that anytime I get more than 4 characters in a scene, I tend to forget people, so I can't continue to write them. I was like, oh no, I should go back and edit this because I forgot someone was there. I just can't hold that much in my head. So shorter stories means there's less things that I have to worry about forgetting, especially because I'm a pantser. So I don't plot, I don't outline, I write as I go, and I also write chronologically. So I don't do any of the tools to help me have things in my head. I just go. So I have to be reliant on what I can physically manage.
Yeah, can relate. I was a pantser for a long time, and I just recently, because people bullied me, I started doing outlines and stuff, mostly because other people had to like read my nonsense and be like, what are you talking about? So I definitely understand the thrill of pantsing, of just like just letting the story completely run wild and then just cleaning it up after you just let it kind of do its thing, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and one of the benefits with short stories is if I dedicate like a week, I could probably have a story finished in that amount of time. Whereas novels is harder. I have done it, right? Because I've done Nano a few years, and so I do have, again, like novels shoved in the drawer. They need a lot of work. But even the one romance novel that I have published, it's a short novel. It's like 60,000 words, which is not very big. It's hard for me to do.
I love a 60,000 word novel, especially for romance. And I know we've talked about this in the podcast before. Like sometimes they can be a bit bloated.
Oh, yes. And
sometimes they don't need to be longer than 60,000 words, especially if the only conflict is two people getting together.
Yes. Yes. Especially once like ebooks came onto the scene and there's a lot of independent writers. I feel like novellas became really big in the romance world. So those are stories that are like between the 30 and 40,000 words. And if it's a simple concept, right, that's all you need. You need to force extra conflict or world building in there. Some stories just aren't meant to be long.
So tell us about some of the stories that you have published that are available out there for people to check out.
Oh, I have a variety. So at
we
this
love
point,
variety.
Yeah. So I also tend to not be very genre specific. I just kind of write what makes me happy. So that could be a contemporary story. It could be
just a chaos goblin. We love it.
Pretty much. Yeah. Fantasy. I tend to do whatever works. I'm also frequently fed by the internet. So that's what happens. So one of my stories that got pretty popular for a while on Tumblr actually was about someone entering a money laundering deal with the Tooth Fairy. So that would be
that's an example.
So I have stories like that. So those are kind of the more like fun fantasy stories. I've actually started getting into more of maybe some like darker fantasy and science fiction. So I have a story called Imitation, which is about humanity rescuing what we think is a stranded race on another planet, except they had actually been abandoned there. Leaning into the idea that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So they think that they should praise their human saviors by slowly morphing into humans, and then you can no longer tell the difference between them. And so the story is a lot of complaints from society about like, it wasn't me who picked up my kid, it was my imitator. And how that just kind of snowballs until you're just like, okay, there's no way to tell the difference internally, externally anymore. So how do you, a little more of those horror stuff.
How do you take a concept that concept seems too big to me to fit into a short story? So like what part of the story do you focus on to make the world make sense in a shorter amount of time?
So I actually I have very tight writing, I will say. So that short story actually covers everything from when we find the aliens to when we realize there's essentially a lynching that happens, and then they realize they like inside, like, oh, that's not like green blood anymore. That's red human blood. And that just goes all the way through in about 1,000 words. So, and what I focus on is the slowly growing mimic powers of the imitators. So how they start in this shape and how they end in the human shape. And it's usually just one example as you're going through. There's no dialogue. So this is really focused in on the situation that's happening and the reaction to it. And you just have to very quickly escalate because a lot of things happen in a short amount of time. But when you have a quick escalation like that, you also tend to have your tension ratchets up really fast in a story, which you could carry through in a short story. I feel like in a novel, you'd have to draw it out. And again, I can't draw it out. So I would have to like come up with characters and I would have to do this and that. And I don't have to do that in a short story. I'm really just, it's that omniscient narrator that's like, these are all the things that have happened. And here are some of the reactions.
I like that. Almost like episodic, like this,
yes,
then this,
except
then this,
each episode would be a paragraph.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But because I was like, well, how do you do that? Like,
no.
Do you focus on just one person's story, or like that makes sense?
You could
escalate through,
yeah,
telling different people's stories as it progresses. I like that. It's so interesting that just the way that people will approach storytelling and the way that different people's brains work in doing that.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
one of my favorite parts about doing this podcast is getting to talk to writers and being both in awe of and a little bit afraid of the way their brains work.
No, I'm with you on that. I mean, that's one of the beauties of writers groups too, is you just have a whole bunch of people that you could chat to and you listen to what other people are writing and you share what you're writing and you're just like, how do you come up with that? How do you manage that? And it's just always fascinating. So, or sometimes you'll see anthologies, right? Where they're like, here's our theme, and so many different people come up with different stories around that same theme. It's always really interesting to read.
Yeah. You talked about in our little blurb that we got from you about your travels.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any that you wanted to touch on specifically that you think have like influenced you as a writer?
So I tend to do a lot of traveling, and sometimes the people that I meet will inspire a short story. Sometimes it's just the world building elements. And a lot of my travel inspiration, I will admit, has just kind of been shoved into those novels that have not seen the light of day. But I just like to learn about different cultures, and I like to add it into different things that I'm doing. So the romance that I have out is also like one of the characters really likes to travel. So I tend to use those type of stories as inspirations and backgrounds for characters that I'm writing about. But we'll see. Like I'm actually going to go to Colombia in 2 weeks now.
Wow.
Right. But one of the trips we have planned is to the lake that's the inspiration for the myth of El Dorado. So who knows? That might inspire something. Those things are just always really neat and fascinating to me, especially since I tend to lean into mythology. A lot of my tales are like fairies, like from the British side of things. And every time I travel, I tend to pick up a book on fairy tales. So one day I will read the book of Iceland fairy tales that I have. I just haven't read the entire thing yet, but our tour guide had some really interesting stories that I'd love to play with one day.
Are the Icelandic fairy tales, are they terrifying? Or are they kind of more like sweet? Because like I don't know. I've heard that like the deep Irish lore is scary, and I've heard some like Scandinavian fairy tales are just like
so they're
terrifying.
they have the same type of creatures, I would say, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
call them terrifying. So they had like a lot of trolls, which you'll see in Scandinavia a lot. So there's a lot of
cool.
stories about like the rock figures in Iceland about this was a troll and now this happened and sent another stone. So in that case, there's like happy endings for the humans. But then they also have like a weird mix of biblical and fae stories, which I thought was fascinating, which is the idea that like in Ireland, right? You have fairies and the little people, and you know they're very beautiful, and all these like creatures that you cannot piss off. But our tour guide had told a story about how God came to visit Adam and Eve didn't get the chance to wash all of her children because she had been misfruitful, and so all the unwashed children she told to hide from God's eyes, and then God made them permanently invisible because he's like, you're not supposed to hide from me, and that's now the fairy of Iceland. Or sorry, yeah,
That's such a cool blend.
God is just a petty little bitch, no matter what the culture.
But so like it's that weird kind of mix of stuff that's happening. But fully completing all of those stories, I think would be interesting to read and then transform. I tend to do a lot of that. Right now on my Substack, I'm doing contemporary fantasy stories based off of the Grimm's fairy tales. So I tend to get a lot of inspiration from mythology.
I love that.
Yeah.
You have a couple of fae stories. Are those more the British side of things that you mentioned?
I would say yes. Those are the fae that I grew up with. So a lot of the books that I read when I was a child were based off of old British myths. Some of them were British authors. So that's just kind of what seeped into my brain. And then eventually I would like to lean more into other mythologies, and sometimes I do. I do have a few short stories that haven't been into my collections yet, but I'm hoping to get them into my next one, inspired by Slavic tales, so specifically Baba Yaga, which I didn't realize how much I knew about mythology until I had to go through my critique group because no one knew who Baba Yaga was, and I was so sad and realized I had to do a lot of explaining in the story.
I feel like that's like most people know. I mean, I know what it is. Like I hear it so much these days in pop culture. So I don't know. That's wild.
Yeah, but that was a surprise to me, that because I had to go through 2 critique groups, and the only person who recognized the tale that I was remixing essentially was someone who had immigrated from Russia. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, so I tend to lean sometimes into that obscure mythology.
Right. I was gonna say maybe it's just because we're also mythology nerds.
It's
That's
very
probably
possible.
Read more of those.
It's very possible. I've always been into myths, but that might also just because I'm Greek, and so that's culturally
sure,
you know, relevant. So,
have you traveled to Greece?
Several times, yes. So, my mom actually immigrated. So when she was a child, so she's lived most of her life here. But I've gone back and I've seen the village and or the remains of the village, and relatives that are still over there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there still a lot of like mythological tourism that happens in Greece? Like, are you able to go see sites?
Oh yeah, like a lot of the old ruins are based off of myths, right? So the Parthenon is one of Zeus's old temples, and I've been to like Delphi, where you can see the structure where people used to go and talk to the oracle. All of that is there. So, and some of it is, I remember just running around the ruins when I was a kid. I don't think you could do that anymore.
They probably frown upon it,
right? Days. So, but it depends on where you're going. My last trip, though, I was in Crete, which is a very different place, but also like you can go and you could tour the Palace of Knossos, which was thought to be the inspiration for the Tale of the Minotaur. So there's a lot of that kind of mix between mythology and history, which I think is always very interesting, because you're like, oh, like it kind of takes things that are a myth and then makes them real, because you could physically touch those stones. And that's always been kind of fascinating to me. And especially like when you look at history, like paganism or versions of it was the real big religion that everyone was following. So if you're going to write a story set in those time periods, you're using myth as your religion.
Yeah.
Man, I have to go to Greece now. Like that that sounds amazing. I can't imagine, especially being anybody who's even remotely creative, walking through that experience and not just being immediately hit with ideas. You know what I mean?
For sure. There's such a cool thing. And I really like Crete because it's very pretty and it's warmer than some of the mainland. But Crete also has history, because you've got some of the old myths, like the old Minoan myths. They have museums of ancient history, because it's like predating what's happening on mainland Greece. You can actually see the ruins, not on Crete, sorry, but on one of the other islands. I remember taking a tour of a ruin that could be like connected to Atlantis. Crete is considered to be maybe an inspiration for Atlantis as well, that huge big swath of land. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and also a whole bunch of mixing of mythology. I remember in their archaeology museum seeing a statue of Hades and Persephone dressed up as Osiris and Iris from the Egyptian mythology. So there's such a blend that's happening there, and in history too, because Crete, a lot of the big port cities are Venetian ports. So you can go and you could see like these really big walls, and they're like, okay, so this is from this time period, this time period, this time period. It's just such a mix. You can't help but be inspired.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about some of the other things that you have on your website, because you don't just write, you also like offer workshops for people who are interested in getting started. What made you want to contribute in that manner as well?
So I have been, for a while, I was a municipal liaison for National Novel Writing Month. I don't, are you familiar with that program?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. So what my region would do is we would do prep workshops. And so we would do a 2-hour workshop about how to do this, how to do that. And we would offer them to free for the libraries. And then we have just built up these partnerships with the libraries. And eventually I started being asked, could I do things outside of the Nano in other parts of the year. And so that's kind of how I slid into that. Is the librarians that approached me. They're like, we think that you have the knowledge for this. Can you help us do like a workshop for our patrons? And so I don't do a lot of it. I probably do 1 or 2 workshops a year. I did one this January on marketing, very basic marketing for authors. And I will be doing one in, we're still figuring out if it'll be June or July for a different library on the 3 paths to publishing, traditional, small press, and indie.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
I notice a couple of them focus on affordability, which I think is really smart. Because as we've talked about on this podcast, like this can be an expensive hobby for authors,
Yes,
if you're not careful.
Yeah, and it's really hard to make a profit doing it. I mean, if you think about it from a business standpoint, and I did go to business school and my day job is in marketing, but there are millions of books being released every year. So every time you release something, it's a saturated market already. Like it's really hard to stick out. It's really hard to make money off of that. So you kind of have to figure out how you want to do it. And as well as how much money are you willing to invest in helping your author business grow. There are ways to do it cheaply. There are ways to do it very expensively. But you're right. I tend to focus on the affordability of it because like I will admit, like I'm still not quite at the point where I'm making a profit from my writing. Like I'm making money, but it's not always matching what I'm putting into it for one reason or another. So I feel like I'm just trying to bring people along with me. And it's something that a lot of people in my writers group are also very interested in, is we all are kind of part-time, quarter-time authors even. We have day jobs. And so we're not really looking into this to become like famous in the next like Rick Riordan or anything. We really just want to see, hey, can this be self-sustaining?
Yeah. Well, and that investment phase is often a part of it. We talk about that in narration as well, that like there's going to be a period of time where it's like, what's paying for your narration habit until you have enough experience and equipment and all of the things that you have to invest in order to finally turn it around and start making money on the back end. But that can take a while as you invest in yourself and your skills and for us, there's equipment matters probably more than for writers. Like you don't need a super fancy computer to write well. Whereas we need a certain quality of microphones or people won't talk to you.
Yeah.
So
I feel like we probably have a similar problem though when it comes into like cover design and book formatting. So to have a good cover design, and that is not like you can buy a microphone once. We can't buy a cover once. That is a reoccurring expense per product. So a lot of people, like I just learned Canva. So most of my covers I actually design myself. And that means I only have to worry about paying the Canva Pro subscription fee, which is great.
You're right. Yeah, because I mean, covers need to be, charged what they're worth, and I understand that, but some of them can be like crazy expensive. And that's tough as like somebody who's just breaking onto the scene. It's either, try to maybe catch a pre-made one that matches your vibe for like $100 maybe, but if you want to get exactly what you want, you either have to be scrappy and do it yourself and like learn that skill to invest in yourself, or you have to reach out to somebody who, they got to charge what they're worth, and that could be, hundreds or thousands of dollars. It could be rough.
Yes. Yeah, it really is, especially if it's like your first book, right? It's not uncommon for authors to invest $3,000 to $5,000 into their first book, and most of them will not see that back.
Right. So yeah, that's I think a hard lesson when you're, especially in indie, when like it's all of it you're throwing in yourself. It's, you pour your heart and soul into it, and you make like, I think when I made $40 one month and thought I was like, I'm killing it. You know what I mean? Like, like that was such a milestone for me. If that, helps people understand, like just really just making like enough to cover your Kindle fees. Like you're like pay for your Kindle Unlimited 1 month. You're like, yes, I'm making it.
Right. So, yeah. And so you can like, and at this point, I just like have all of potential expenses. I also like write off as my taxes, which is kind of helpful. I was like, yeah, I need internet to write, tax write off, new laptop. Yep. So it's helpful. I don't have Kindle Unlimited though, so I can't write that off.
Yeah, I like recently learned that could be an expense. And like my tax guy was like, if you use your phone for social media, you can write that off too. And I was like, So just stuff like that.
Well, I have to wonder too, like to a certain extent, even the traveling you do, if it is
Yes
inspiration for your
and
writing.
no. Authors have actually done it in the past where you can write it off as a travel trip. Usually has to be for a specific project though. And I just don't do that. I travel and then I get inspired versus I am writing a book set in Budapest. So I need to go to Budapest and explore the city. So
yeah, I guess that would be trickier.
Maybe one day, but
yeah, I think it depends on your accountant.
That's probably fair.
Not the sort of people the IRS needs to be going after. Authors getting inspiration from travel.
Exactly.
Right.
Leave them alone. There are bigger fish to fry.
We don't make that much money anyways.
Right?
You can ignore us.
Leave us alone. You can't have my $40.
Right.
I also see on your website a picture of you narrating, doing audio.
So that's kind of the strategy of going wide with my books, right? So I want to go wide with where you can buy them and where you can, how you can consume them. So I have actually recorded myself in a library's audio booth, one of my collections.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Has it turned into an audiobook yet? No. Like I have it all recorded and now I'm just kind of like, oh, now you got to like remaster the files and get them in like the formatting that like, you know, Find Away Voices needs. So I've been in that like stuck phase of like, what do I now do with these files? So I might just bite the bullet and pay for someone to actually put together the final product. But I have narrated that myself.
Yeah.
My collections tend to be smaller, so the final product will probably be a narration of like $150 or sorry, an hour and a half, which a lot of narrators might be charging like $150 an hour. So I'm just like, I can do that myself. I just slowly booked session after session in the library.
Yeah, I was like, $150 an hour would actually be very cheap.
Yeah, so, right. Yeah, no. That's true. There are places where I know where you can find that, but just kind of like with a pre-made cover, there's ranges.
And that is, you know, the thing. And we have talked about, you know, that sometimes the cover can really sell a book. Like it's not to be discounted as a thing that could be helpful for you. And the same way with narration, like we all needed a place to start. We all had that first person to trust us when we were still figuring things out ourselves.
Yeah.
But there are certain, like there's a ceiling. The higher you go, the more quality you're probably going to get with the narration. But again, there's a ceiling, and some people are way above that. Like they're, especially the men in romance, like some of them are making way too much per finished hour. And I'll be the first to say that because they just think they're God's gift. But anyways, did you say you recorded that in your library sound booth?
Yeah. So
that's such a cool service.
There's a lot of the libraries near me are actually pretty decently funded, I would say. So that's not technically my library where I recorded it. It's the library in the town next door. But because of the connections I built as a municipal liaison, like I know the librarians there. I've done the trainings on how to do it. I've done workshops there, free and paid. Anyone can use the equipment there. You don't have to be part of that town, which is really nice.
That's so cool. They're building the new branch library down the street from my house right now for Green Bay. And there's a part of me now that wants to reach out and be like, do you have space for this? Like, I'll help you set it up. Cause that's such a cool idea that I just hadn't heard of, as like, what a cool place, especially for somebody like an independent author who has the chops and wants to do their own narration, but without having to invest the thousands in equipment and soundproofing and treating your space for audio, which is like the big upfront expense.
I hear about like a lot of indie authors who are trying to get into it, even if they're just doing like their own like podcast, right? You know, you're in your closet because your clothes can work as the dampener.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, my library or the library next door is actually really good about that. And the setup is built so you could do like audiobook narration. I was one of the first people who were doing it. They were very interested. A lot of their patrons were actually interested in doing music. So they've got like a keyboard in there and a drum set and a few music recording or music mixing software in there, but it's also set up for podcasting. So you can have 2 people in there and they each have the mics, and you could just record your podcast in there if you had a local guest. I don't know how well it would work over a system like this. But yeah, libraries are amazing. Everyone should be using them.
Absolutely.
Moral of the story, libraries are amazing. That is so cool.
Yeah. So trying to do some audio, because my own books are pretty short. It's not a huge stress for me to do them. And because I have short stories, I can pretty easily be like, okay, 1-3 stories a session that I book. So it works out well.
I love that. That's really cool. And it really just speaks to like when you are doing this as a freelancer, as an indie artist of lots of different genres, to take advantage of the resources that are available to you, especially if your community offers stuff like that. And like, I'm always amazed by what the library offers. Every time I go in there, it's something new.
Oh, for sure. And they will help promote you in one way or another. So, like the library actually, like as part of their like quarterly newsletter, at one point they had a photo of me in their sound booth there. So I'm like, oh, they're talking about here's how you could use it, but that's also my name. So they can like go Google me if they want. So they're just really good partners. I actually have a friend recently who I hadn't thought about it before, but she just randomly booked a room in the library and used that for her book launch party. Like it cost zero money to reserve the room. And she just told people like, hey, come see me here at this library. I was like, okay.
That's such a good idea. And
lots
it's
of
fun.
ways to use them.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I think libraries are awesome is a great place to end.
Right.
It's a positive note to end on. So thank you so much for coming on and chatting about your work and so many other things. You've given me lots of ideas. You did say we would ramble,
so it worked out.
Yeah, if there's eventually a sound booth in my branch at the library, I'll let you know because you just inspired that. So thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll chat again in the future.
Thanks for having me on.
Many thanks to Gwen for joining us on the podcast. If you want to follow or connect with Gwen, her website and socials are in the show notes. JP, thank you again for coming on and filling in for Maz. We so appreciate you.
Of course. It was fun.
It was lovely. I hope you'll come back at some point in the near future, whether that's because Maz is here or not.
Yeah, it would be nice to hang out with Maz a little, but yeah.
That's true. Maybe I'll take off. Maybe I'll go somewhere for a couple weeks.
Sure.
You take it. You have fun. So, but sincerely, thank you so much for filling in. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
And listeners, I will be back next week with question mark. We'll find out. Tune in next week. Bye.